Pompey throws again. In the dark days before his flight into exile, the frantic orator had gone grovelling to Pompey as well as to Caesar. Cicero had long despaired of his idol's failings, but he had never entirely given up on him. Despite Pompey's evident complicity in the outrages of Caesar's consulship, Cicero had continued to hope against hope that all might yet be well, and the great man be won back to the cause of legitimacy. Pompey, for his part, had been flattered to play the role of Cicero's patron, and had even condescended to warn Clodius against pushing his vendetta too far. There had been a certain pathos in this gesture at a time when his popularity was in free fall, and he was being booed for the first time in his life. Pompey had found in Cicero's hero worship a welcome reminder of the good old days. Desperate to unburden his doubts and frustrations, he had even confessed to the orator that he regretted his role in the triumvirate, a relation that Cicero, in high excitement, had immediately passed on to all his friends. Inevitably, Caesar had got wind of it, and had been confirmed in his view that Cicero would have to go. Pompey, forced to choose between his father-in-law and his trusting friend, had reluctantly acquiesced. As Clodius's persecution of Cicero reached its violent climax, so he had retired in embarrassment to his country villa. Refusing to take the hint, Cicero had pursued him there. He had been informed by the doorman that no one was at home. Pompey, unable to face an interview with the man he had betrayed, had slipped out through the back. With Cicero safely gone, the great man was plunged into a renewed bout of brooding. Equivocations did not sit well with his self-image. He was still no nearer to squaring the impossible circle that had tormented him since his return from the East. He wanted the respect and admiration of his peers, and the supreme authority to which he believed his achievements entitled him. But he could not have both. Now, having made his choice, he found that power without love had a bitter taste. Spurned by Rome, Pompey turned for comfort instead to his wife. He had married Caesar's daughter, Julia, for the chilliest of political motives, but it had not taken him long to grow helplessly smitten with his young bride. Julia, for her part, gave her husband the adoration without which he could not flourish. Surrendering to their mutual passion, the couple began to spend more and more time secluded in a love nest in the country. Pompey's fellow citizens, unaccustomed as they were to displays of conjugal affection, sniggered in prurient disapproval. Here was true scandal. The public resentment of Pompey began to grow, tinged with scorn. No one was more sensitive to this changing wind of opinion than Clodius. He had a good nose for weakness, and began to wonder whether Pompey, for all the glamour of his reputation and his loyal veterans, might not perhaps be a man of straw, a hunch far too tempting not to be put immediately to the test. Aware that nothing would prove more vexatious to Pompey than a renewed assault on his settlement in the East, the issue which, after all, had forced him into the fateful alliance with Crassus and Caesar in the first place, Clodius went straight for the jugular. Prince Tigranes, the son of the king of Armenia, was still in Rome as a hostage, 8 years after his father had handed him over to Pompey as a guarantee of good behavior. Clodius not only abducted the prince from under the great man's nose, but then, to add injury to insult, put him on a boat bound for Armenia. When Pompey tried to seize back his hostage, his supporters were set upon and beaten up. The establishment, far from taking Pompey's side, relished the spectacle of his impotent rage. This, of course, was precisely what Clodius had been banking on. Even as his gangs were rampaging through the streets, he found himself basking in the glow of the Senate's approval. Not that Clodius, given the opportunity to humiliate an enemy, had ever needed much encouragement. As with Cicero, so now with Pompey, he could smell blood. His gangs duly went into a feeding frenzy. Whenever the unhappy Pompey ventured into the forum, he would be greeted with a chorus of jeers. This was no idle matter. One of the most ancient laws of the Republic defined the chanting of abuse as akin to murder. By the light of such tradition, Clodius was issuing death threats, and Pompey was unnerved accordingly. He had never before been the object of such mockery. His passion for his wife provoked particular hilarity. "What's the name of the sex-mad general?" Clodius would yell. "Who touches the side of his head with his finger?" And after each question, he would make a signal to the mob by shaking out the folds of his toga, and his gangs, like a trained chorus, would scream out the answer in unison, "Pompey!" For a man given to dressing up as a dancing girl to accuse Rome's greatest general of effeminacy took some nerve. This was all the more so because many of his most intimate circle were also embroiled in sex scandals. Mark Antony, moving on from his affair with Curia, had begun sniffing around Clodius's much-loved wife, Fulvia. A breach of the codes of friendship that would soon see the two men threatening to kill each other. Similar trouble was also brewing over a woman to whom Clodius was even more passionately devoted. Following his triumphant prosecution of Hybridia, Marcus Caelius had celebrated by renting a luxury apartment from Clodius on the Palatine. There he had met with Clodia. Witty, handsome, and famous for his rhythm, Caelius had proved to be just the widow's type. The ambitious Caelius had needed no encouragement to take up with a Claudian, and Claudia, with her husband barely cold, was evidently in the mood for consolation. Of course, her idiosyncratic style of mourning could not help but raise eyebrows. The affairs of the great lady remained a topic of abiding interest to Rome's scandal rakers, and a favourite theme of abusive sloganeering in the forum. But no matter what was chanted against him and his sister, Clodius was always able to drown it out. Charges of immorality only provoked him to ever more furious denunciations of his own. The outrageous hypocrisy of it all only added to the fun, and so the abuse of Pompey and his lechery continued. Of course, Clodius being Clodius, he could not resist seeing just how far the intimidation could be pushed. In August, as Pompey was crossing the Forum to attend a meeting of the Senate, a clattering of metal on stone rang out from the temple of Castor. One of Clodius's slaves had pointedly dropped a dagger. Pompey, believing his life to be in danger, at once retreated from the forum and barricaded himself behind his front door. Clodius's gangs pursued him and set up camp outside. The tribune threatened to do to Pompey what he had already done to Cicero: seize his mansion, level it, and build a temple to liberty in its place. Pompey, unlike Cicero, did not bolt and run, but he found himself blockaded, unable to leave his house. A staggering reversal for the greatest man in the Republic. Again, the Senate watched on in smug satisfaction. Crassus, with whom Clodius had been careful to remain on excellent terms, naturally shared in the general smirking. For Clodius himself, It was an intoxicating, scarcely believable moment of triumph. Champion of the aristocracy, patron of the slums, he appeared to be the master of Rome. But only fleetingly. By testing the opportunities provided by street violence to the very limits, Claudius had blazed a trail that others were already preparing to follow. In December 58, Claudius's term of office came to an end. Among the new tribunes was a gruff and brutal Pompeian, Titus Annius Milo. Encouraged by his patron, Milo formally indicted Claudius for employing violence, an open and shut case if there ever was one. Claudius, by appealing to his brother Appius, who was praetor that year, managed to have the charge suppressed, and ordered his gangs to ransack Milo's house in revenge. But the new tribune, backed by the infinite resources of Pompey, and aware that he was dead meat unless he met violence with violence, refused to be intimidated. He began to recruit gangs of his own, not, as Claudius had done, by bribing amateurs from the slums, but by importing well-armed, well-trained heavies from Pompey's estates and buying up gladiators to steal their ranks. At a stroke, Claudius's monopoly on street violence ended, a challenge to which the former tribune rose with predictable gusto. The gang warfare escalated daily. Soon it had become so brutal that all government institutions in the forum, including the law courts, had to be suspended. Day after day, across the public places of Rome, the tides of anarchy ebbed and flowed. By such desperate measures did Pompey impose himself and his authority back upon a city in which for months he had been kept under virtual house arrest. Yet the Senate, as well as the streets, had to be bent to his will, and Claudius, the arrogant, impossible Claudius, given a taste of his own medicine. The obvious means for achieving that was even then wringing his hands in high-flown misery across the Adriatic. Pompey, having refused to exert himself to save Cicero the year before, now began touring Italy, drumming up support for the exile's return. Clients in the countryside and provincial towns were ordered to Rome. All through the summer of 57, they flooded into the capital. Meanwhile, Caesar, far away in Gaul, had been persuaded to give his reluctant approval to Cicero's recall, and a vote in the Senate also backed it by 416 to 1. The dissenting voice had invariably belonged to Claudius. In August, the long-awaited public vote was finally held in the Campus Martius. Claudius, attempting to disrupt it, was seen off with contemptuous ease by Milo, whose gangs stood on guard all day by the Ovia. So confident was Cicero of the result that he had already set sail for Italy as the vote was being held, and he was brought the news of his official recall as he waited in Brundisium. His progress from then on, with Tullia, his adored and much-missed daughter by his side, was like a dream come true. Cheering supporters lined the Appian Way. As he approached Rome, the crowd streamed out to greet him. Applause followed him wherever he went. "I did not simply return home," he observed modestly, "but ascended into the sky." But not even Cicero was conceited enough to doubt that the real triumph had been Pompey's. More than ever, the orator's old, familiar boasting had a shrillness bred of fear. Every Roman found it an agony to owe another man a favor, and Cicero now owed Pompey and Caesar his career. Hence his gushing in the Senate House, as well as leading the praise for Caesar's conquests. He found himself proposing that Rome's entire corn supply be put into Pompey's hands. The motion was passed, but only once Claudius, with hateful logic, had pointed out to the Senate House its precise implications. Pompey would be able to bribe the starving slums with bread, while Cicero, the self-proclaimed scourge of demagoguery, now stood revealed as its agent. The bare-faced effrontery of these accusations did not make them any less true. Cicero duly spluttered and squirmed. The exchange in the Senate House had served notice that Clodius felt not remotely chastened by his enemy's return. When Cicero succeeded in persuading Rome's priests that his mansion on the Palatine be restored to him without offense to the goddess Liberty, Clodius resorted to naked terrorism. Cicero's workmen were driven from the building site. His brother's house was set on fire. Cicero himself was assaulted on the Via Sacra. At the same time, the street fighting between Clodius and Milo reached a new pitch of violence, and the two gang leaders, each openly threatening to murder the other, also attempted to pursue each other through the courts. Once again, Milo indicted Clodius on a charge of using violence, and once again, by pulling strings in the Senate, Clodius wriggled free. In February 56, with a hypocrisy remarkable even by his standards, Clodius brought an identical charge against Milo. Cicero and Pompey, rallying to their man's cause, prepared to speak in Milo's defense. The spectacle of his three deadliest enemies lined up against him threw Clodius into a frenzy. As Pompey rose to speak, the forum seethed with catcalls and jeers. Clodius, from the prosecutor's bench, began cheering on his gangs. As he had done before, he stood and tugged on his toga, giving cues to his supporters as they chanted abuse. Soon they were spitting at Milo's strong arms, then throwing fists and stones. Milo's gangs fought back. Clodius himself was dragged off the rostra, and a full-scale battle broke out. Amid the pandemonium, the trial itself was abandoned. Pompey, shaken and bruised, retired from the forum, pale with fury. He was in no doubt who the mastermind behind the riot had been, and it was not Clodius. For 3 years, Pompey had been in a syndicate with Crassus, and still he was quick to blame his old nemesis for every debacle. On this occasion, however, his suspicions appeared well-founded. Ever since autumn 57 and his appointment as Rome's grain commissar, Pompey had been angling for another eastern command. So too had Crassus. Until the riot, mutual self-interest had kept their rivalry in the shadows, but Clodius, typically, had ripped aside the veil. "Who's after a trip east?" he had bellowed to his gangs. "Pompey!" The gangs had thundered back in reply. "Who do we all want to go instead?" The answer had been deafening and calculated to give Pompey apoplexy. "Crassus!" A few days later, Pompey told Cicero that he blamed his partner in the triumvirate for the riot, for Clodius, for everything. Then he confided, just for good measure, that Crassus was plotting to have him killed. The news spread like wildfire. The triumvirate was finished. That much, at least, seemed clear to everyone. If anyone did express surprise, it was only that the syndicate had lasted so long. After all, as surely as the seasons passed, so too did the grip of great men upon power. In that spring of 56 BC, the thaw seemed general throughout the Republic. Old enemies of the triumvirate, Bibulus, Curio, began to stir, stretch their limbs, wake from hibernation. In the Senate, the riot in the Forum was officially condemned as contrary to the interests of the Republic, and the responsibility for it pinned not on Clodius, but on Pompey. This insult to his honor needled the great man into another vast explosion of temper, and inevitably he blamed Crassus. But although this may briefly have served to cheer him up, The evidence of his unpopularity with the entire Senate was now too glaring to be ignored. All his dearest ambitions, to bask in the praise and respect of his peers, to lead a brilliant second command to the east, stood revealed as hopeless fantasies. For Pompey the Great, it appeared, the glory days were over. As his fury subsided, he plunged into a massive sulk. The scent of his failure hung like carrion perfume over Rome. In the Senate, scavengers whined and snarled with excitement. With Pompey wallowing helplessly in the shallows, attention next turned to the prospects for beaching a second big beast. Caesar's enemies knew that there would never be a better opportunity to finish him off. 3 years they had been waiting, and now, at last, one of them moved in for the kill. Courage came easy to Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, and in his case, it was indistinguishable from an arrogance so pronounced as to verge on stupidity. Obscenely rich, obscenely well-bred, he was a man described by Cicero, who was sensitive to such things, as having been born a consul designate. In that spring of 56, Domitius prepared to claim his birthright. A brother-in-law of Kador, a blood enemy of Pompey, who had executed Domitius's brother in the dark days of the Civil War, there could be no doubting where his loyalties would lie. In announcing that he would stand for the consulship, he openly declared that, if elected, he would have Caesar's command declared invalid. As a replacement, naturally, he proposed himself. Transalpine Gaul had been conquered by his grandfather, and he regarded it as his hereditary right. At his back, the establishment bayed its approval. First Pompey, now Caesar. Surely the overreachers, the would-be tyrants, were doomed. 4.5 centuries of the Republic's history said that they were. Tradition was stronger than any triumvirate. One man slipped, another took his place. This was how it had always been. Let Pompey, Caesar, and their successors be eclipsed. Whatever happened, the Republic would endure. Or so everyone assumed. Hello, my name is Kador Amazing, and that was me, at the behest of my daughter, reading excerpts from the antediluvian relic Rubicon by Tom Holland. If you are interested in reading the relic in its entirety, I am sure they have it installed within the databases of the Mass City Museum of History. Regardless, it is quite strange, quite interesting how many parallels there are between modern-day Mass City and ancient Rome. If you would like to see an adaptation of my life, you will do well to check out Killing Machine Movement, coming soon. Yes, it's very good. I don't know, experience it. Now be gone, you plebiscite scum cunt!